Thank you, Rae, so much for giving up your time to join us. I'm going to do a little brief biog of Rae. Again, I think known to you all, but Rae's an artist, theatre set and costume designer, and currently Roostein Hopkins Drawing Fellow at UAL, exploring drawing in the process of her work in the live performing arts. She's performed drawing with the Google Tilt Brush and with the London Philharmonic Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall in a mixture of live drawing, animation and orchestral music. So very much in that territory that we've been talking about this morning. At the moment, she's designing Marriage of Figaro, Rigoletto for Opera North, Walden for Sonia Friedman, and Kay Tempest's Paradise for the National Theatre. Just before we go to questions, to get your reaction, I said at the beginning that this is very much about bringing theory and practice together, and we've had two practitioners. We've had historians, we've had theorists who's also a practitioner in terms of Taya. But what's your initial, where are you within all these arguments at the moment as a practitioner?
Before the pandemic, I'll start there. We were busy, I was busy working in different kinds of virtual realities, be it creating a theatrical world that pretended to be a virtual reality, like working at the National Theatre with Paul on Wonder Dot Land, and that was like a while ago, but nonetheless, a lot of these thoughts are pertinent to that because it's a sense of young adults living in a very black and white, depressive, restrained world of rules and stuff they're having to connect with. And then what happens is this one young adult, Ali, through her interface of screen, mobile or whatever it is, iPad or whatever, disappears down a rabbit hole into another world. Of course, a lot of action happens to her, and she happens to it in this case, which isn't always true for Alice in Wonderland. But in this case, she happens to it. And she goes on a life journey that she comes out of with a sense of herself, her self-knowledge, and sort of a happy mental health circumstance, if you want to see it in that way. And I think that as a metaphor, that is a great way of considering what we could do for the mental health and the imagination of our young adults approaching the theatre, being involved in the theatre. And it sort of is a very nice interface also with, you know, art made in the bedroom or whatever sort of small place you're in when you're interacting, and also a way of connecting to the world through picture making, image making, and whether it's graffiti or whether it's actually, you know, software architecture, or whether it's sort of simply by connecting to a kind of stimulating and imaginative place where young people can get together and make something. I think that's what we lack at the moment, is making stations. I don't know about you, but I've found making things has actually saved my bacon on quite a few occasions, in terms of just being involved in doing stuff. Like whether it's drawing is always good for me personally, but actually doing stuff that gives you a present sense of self and a sort of creative capacity and an expression is really fantastic. And then being able to show that to someone, be it online at the moment, or, you know, some kind of virtual exhibition, is also brilliant. And I'm anyway, sort of scoping forward, of course, what happened to all of us designers last March is that everything stopped. And so for me, 7 shows fell away just like that. And it was very much a kind of picture in my mind of the castles that were these different sort of establishments or shows disintegrating, like on the beach when they dry out and the wind blows them away. And it sort of was like devastating, actually. And then trying to connect to society through the establishments or the buildings was hard, because they were so busy, you know, bailing out the water in their own lifeboats. But eventually we did connect. And what was really interesting for us theatre designers was making a scene change. So which was a way of us personally connecting to each other, which is something that we'd never done before, because the environment for designers, theatre designers, is competitive. So the last time you spoke and enjoyed the company of a designer was random or accidentally in the pub or the cafe, which doesn't happen anymore. And or it would be at college, when you're at college, training or working with other designers. And consequently, I found that I'm really still friends with the designers I was at college with. And this is like 100 years later since I was in college. So it's sort of like really, I think that's something to keep in mind here, because we make connections with each other all the time. And I think the thing that I was very interested in was all of a sudden realizing how difficult it was to work online. You know, these kind of Zooms that we do are great because we can get together in these kind of strange ways, but not so great because, say, at the moment I'm working on Marriage of Figaro in France. We'll talk about technical issues that if I was in the room talking about them, we'd infer different ways of working together and thinking about it simply by how we stood around the project or the problem or held it up and looked at it. And all those things are gone. So you may be solving a problem or an issue, a design issue with somebody on Zoom, and it would take like 4 half-hour calls when it would have taken 5 minutes if you were together. So those are really basic making something together issues that we're up against.
That's great, Rae. I'll stop you there, but that's fantastic. So in a way, picking up what Arnold's talking about spatialities, new spatialities. Yeah. It's not just in terms of audiences and going to the theatre and the way we experience it. It's also in the making process.
Oh, absolutely.
You're having to find other ways of course, one could also take in Paul's agenda, say, but you didn't fly to France, you didn't travel to France to do that. So I suppose it's like a plus and a minus all the way through. Yeah. I'm going to, because we've only got half an hour now for questions. So I'm going to go to Kelly, who's got a load of questions lined up. And then, you know, some for specific members of the panel and some for particular people. So Kelly, do you want to kind of try and call up the people who've got questions?
Yep, so we've got a little bit of a running order. So the first question's from Peter Farley to Arnold. So Marie's going to take him off mute and I can see him there. Peter, would you like to present your question to Arnold?
Yes. Hello, Arnold. Hello, everybody else.
Hello, Peter.
Hi. Thea told us about an exciting virtual reality production called Current Rising at the Limbury Theatre, which a small number of spectators donned virtual reality headsets in order to experience the event. I'd love to do that, actually. It was very exciting, Thea. Thank you. This led me to thinking that the spectator's experience in this instance is a solo or a lone experience. And my question is how important do you think it is that the experience of a theatre is an experience shared by an audience simultaneously in the same place?
That's actually something that I was thinking about even as I was preparing my talk. Most theater experiences tend to be a collective of some sort, and part of the experience of space is the experience of the people around you in one way or another, whether they're sitting next to you or whether you're moving about in some kind of immersive environment. We also, we talk about being sort of lost in ourselves, that sometimes when something is really grabs our attention, we sort of forget about everything around us. And so that's a kind of a solo experience. But not that one is better than the other, but I think when you're putting on the headset and experiencing this within this enclosed space, that is a very solo experience, and it's perfectly fine, but it's not the same thing as I believe it's not the same thing as being in a space when, even if you're not actively interacting with other people, you are there in the space, you're aware of it, you're aware of the space wherever the performance is taking place, and you go into that space. And at the end, you come out of that space and you've all experienced something together. So this is something that is changing. And maybe it will be the future. Maybe that will be the dominant form for the future. And what I would like people to be aware of is to be aware of what that difference is and the fact that it has changed or it is changing.
Arnold, just going back to what Rae was saying, do you think this, I don't mean a generational thing in that we're of a different generation, which we are, but in terms of there's a younger generation which has already a different experience of space in terms of the use of their mobile phones and the way in which they experience kind of being alone together in a different way that we experience being alone together. I just wondered if that's something else that we need to be projecting in terms of their own, because they are the next audience, aren't they?
Right. Oh, these kids today. I think part of what I was trying to say is that, yes, I mean, the audience has been changing, and there is already a significant audience for performance of some sort that does not experience it within the centuries-old traditional theater spaces. They are experiencing it virtually. They're experiencing it on screens, and that's the world that they know. What has happened in this last year is that all of us have been plunged into that world. Our experience of performance has been almost exclusively online in one way or another. And so my question is, all of us having experienced that, how easy will it be to go back to the old experience when we now enter into a theater, putting aside questions of do we feel safe, but will we still understand that vocabulary? Will we still understand how we interact with that space? I think that for some people that will be lost, and that virtual audience will continue to expand, and the actual audience or the spatial audience will continue to exist, but I think the understanding of it will be different. The ability to read the stage will have changed.
Thanks. I think Taya wants to come in. I've got a note. Taya, put your mic on. Hang on.
As I said before, and as I say to my students every time, the word of 2021 is "you are muted." So now I was muted. I want to start with an anecdote that connects with a personal anecdote that connects to Arnold's comment. In Sydney, where I live, there is a theatre around the corner. It's 3 minutes from me. And it was closed. It's called the Enmore Theatre. It was closed during the pandemic, but of course in Sydney, not for very long, because we are more or less pandemic free now. The last time it was closed, completely shut, was during the Spanish flu. And they reopened it with Medea, which I thought was kind of a nice gesture. But when they reopened it, they had in the aisles buckets or troughs with disinfectant, and people had to walk through those troughs of disinfectant before they got to their seats. So 4 weeks ago, the theatre reopened after 1 year, and I was part of the audience, and there were 1,200 people. And Arnold, believe me, it didn't take us 1 minute to get back into that collective feeling. And everybody was touched, everybody was emotional. The people on the stage were emotional. Everybody was so grateful to be back and to be in the same space together. And I think this desire for a collective experience that can, of course, develop into all sorts of things that we maybe not want, but this very positive collective experience that we can have in the theatre, I think we just have it in us. And but we also have a desire for virtuality. That is not a new desire. It's not a new desire in mankind. It didn't start. Audience is also about bearing witness together. Yeah, exactly. So the ritualistic aspect of live theatre, I think, is a human desire, is a human thing. But the desire for virtuality is also there. So now let me get to Peter's question or to Peter's comment. about the current rising. See, I don't think it's a solo experience, because there are 4 people and they're not moving in unison, but they're moving in the same space with the goggles and with the backpack. But I don't think we need to put on our phenomenological hats, but maybe we do. We feel each other's body. We feel each other's body, and we feel how we are moving in a fairly confined space, even if we cannot see each other. So I don't think that working with virtual performance in that specific case, there are many, many very unsuccessful examples of virtual performance, which is also why it hasn't taken off at all, actually. It's also much too expensive for repertoire companies. But I do think we experience our body and the other bodies in a very new and very novel and extremely exciting way.
Thank you, Taya. And Rae has posted in the chat that audiences about bearing witness together, and that seems to endorse that. Could we go on to another question, please, Kelly?
Yep, this is a question for Taya again. It's from Cathy Turner. So Cathy, your microphone should be enabled for you to speak now.
Yeah, it is. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think my question is to some extent answered by your answer to the previous question. And it's not really directed to specific examples, because I think it's great that we have lots of different ways of making theatre, but it's about the future, how we think about the future of performance. And it was just wondering about what happens to the politics of theatre, partly in relation to the previous question. If you remove that assembly in the same place, if that is no longer the norm, but also thinking about, you were talking about how our sense of space becomes, I'm going to misquote you here, but sort of mutable and dynamic and changeable. And I'm thinking about the vulnerability of specific places where we might feel that although they are, mutable, sometimes in ways that are quite upsetting, they don't feel as easily changeable. And so what does this do to our sense of those places, or can we speak about those places through these forms? I think that's my question. Yeah, it's about the politics of it. What does it do? Or are there gains as well? There might be.
The politics of space in performance, or the politics of the potential of the. I think you were saying something about the political potential of assembly, and how can that work in virtual space?
I think you partly already answered that.
Okay.
I was wondering about the environmental kind of pressures on specific places, and whether, if we don't have assembly in the same place, whether this new sense of space and place that you were talking about makes it more difficult to talk about those I don't know how to put it, real life places.
Oh, no, I understand. No, Cathy, I think it's a really, really exciting point, because as I said, a lot of VR, a lot of augmented reality is most successful, in my opinion and my limited experience, in therapeutic settings. So where people work with post-traumatic survivors of traumatic events, where they work with simulations, etc., VR, augmented reality, and even this tiny little example that I brought you from Brisbane with the Google Labs, they took their little augmented reality magic flute into old age homes and presented it to dementia patients, for instance. So, and extremely successful and an extremely joyful, uncomplicated experience for these people, because it's just for them. It is something for them that they can hold on to. So the whole idea of shrinking a theatrical community to a virtual connection through devices, however cumbersome or however elegant they may be, may have something unsettling. For me, it doesn't, because I don't judge it. I look at it, I observe it. I'm interested in the phenomenon of it. I'm interested in bodily perception in all different kinds of ways. And virtual reality, or even more so, augmented reality, really blurs the spaces that you're talking about. You know, the space of my body and the space of the performance. I think that's a very, very exciting proposition. At the moment, those projects are nothing more, as far as I can see it, than propositions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taya. I think, am I right in saying we've got a question from Cathy now, Cathy Courtney?
We just spoke to Cathy Turner, and now we're going to Jess Curtis.
Oh,
Jess question.
Right, here's Jess.
And this is for Paul.
For Paul.
Hello, Paul. I just had a really simple question, because I often tend to over elaborate, but essentially I just wanted to know if you thought digital forms would be, as they're often cited to be, a more sustainable performance form. I just wondered what you thought about that.
I don't have a simple answer to that, because I don't know. I think it definitely has a future in the world. You know, certainly when we start to assess the impacts of touring, there'll be something to think about there. But I'm not sure, although I think sort of digital interaction, certainly in how we make work and how we communicate with each other, I think that's going to have a big part to play in sustainable theatre practice. I think performance, I'm not sure how far that discussion is going to take us. This is what we're all talking about, isn't it? The collective experience, the shared experience, and the logical conclusion of sustainable theatre is to put it all on the radio, and I don't think we're advocating that quite yet.
Thank goodness.
Rae, you were shaking your head there. Did you want to come in there? Put your mic on.
Yeah, I'm sort of like, I realised that I went to see a performance of theatre with an audience that was COVID safe, and I sat there and I was really excited about being there. I was really excited about the live event and everything, but I had to analyse how I felt in where my next member of audience was like 5 meters away from me. And why was I feeling super lonely in that situation? And why did it stop me from being relaxed? And how did it make me feel when I was absorbing what was happening to me on stage? And I was slightly more self-conscious than I normally am when I'm squashed up against somebody sat next to me or sort of next to me. There's a sense when you're together with an audience that you're bearing witness to something together. It's like in art in life, like if you're in a riot and the police came and beat somebody, there's 5 of you who witnessed that. That's really important, because those 5 of you will tell the story either in court or to your friends and family as a way of saying, I know this happened. It's an experience in my life. I was scared. I felt it. And those kind of things, those kind of feelings, those kind of experiences, not for that particular instant, but just in life, are what we as theatre makers are souped up to put on stage. So our question as theatre makers is how, like in a virtual world, how do we allow our audience to feel safe enough, to feel comfortable enough to enjoy being alone together or being together alone, or they're 2 different things. And also then how the sense of the human experience from the actor on the stage to how we make the show, how does that translate through virtual reality brilliantly, dramatically, in the sense that the audience are experiencing it as if it were their own feelings. Now, I've been in situations where that's happened, but it's also to do with actually somebody laying hands on me and pushing me into the place where I have to be in order to experience it. So that interaction was profound because I was desensitized, I was super sensitized in other places. But I think those things, you know, are something for us all to sort of connect to, because it's so complicated what's happened to us. It's so complicated what we've lost and what we kind of look into, you know, and we need to sort of reconstruct it and put it together and channel it into different communication fields. And I think that that you don't want a half-assed show because it's VR. You want the VR to work to its strengths, and that's the kind of heart of the job, really. That's what I think.
Thanks, Rae.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. You know, I just don't think VR is anti-humanity. To be very blunt, I don't think it is. It's just it's a different thing. It's a different animal altogether. And of course, also for a scenographer to experiment in VR is an extremely exciting thing. Of course.
Can I just say to tell, well, to everybody really, but it still feels so new, doesn't it? It feels so young. It feels so. No, I'm sure.
I don't think it does, because it came out of the media arts of the 80s, and so I've sort of been in that space of media art and beginning digital performances, for now 40 years.
But the experience.
So but the interesting thing is that media art doesn't exist anymore, because media artists then went into Google Creative Labs and went to the big technology people where they could further develop what they couldn't do anymore on their little laptops. So media art really hasn't flourished after about 97, 90, 98. But now we have virtual reality in almost all aspects of our life. So it's kind of, whether we talk about the Internet of Things, or or whether we talk about therapeutic VR, or we talk about performance VR, it's pervasive, and it has been pervasive for a long time.
I understand the pervasiveness, and I suppose the actual experience of it, the kind of the headsets, the gear, the thing, feels as if that will move very, very quickly, and we'll be using little chips or little thing, and there'll be a kind of thing on our wrist or something, and we'll get that experience or something. The kind of mechanics of it, the materiality of it is still in its development, and I think that, for me anyway, kind of sort of hinders the. I've yet to have a VR experience where that wasn't something of a kind of barrier in some way. I haven't been able to kind of completely relax into it because of that, but that may be just my limited experience. And I was just thinking about looking at paintings, how you could look at a painting in a gallery and become completely absorbed, and you're on your own, and yet you might be completely surrounded by other people, but you will immerse yourself. You go to that painting, and it feels that we need to get that kind of sophistication with the materiality of VR. Anyway, less of me. Let's move on. Thank you, Jess, for your question. We got another question, Kelly.
Yeah, next person to ask a question is from Agnes. She had a couple of questions, so I'll just open it up if you would like to ask a question to the group.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you very much for your really inspiring talks early on. My question was really because when I was listening to Thea, and I, maybe like many of us, we're at home and have been at home with our children, having been homeschooled, and that just suddenly wastes a lot of. I became much more witness to see what's going on, with the children in normally they're away, at school, and I don't really know what they're doing. I have a teenage daughter who's almost 15, so I just suddenly thought, the whole VR and AR is maybe something that could really enhance the sort of experience children have at school, because at the moment we are still teaching them how we have taught children for the last 100 years or so. It's very frontal, it's very much a teacher talking and using the same methods and signs and ways of illustration, quite abstract concepts. And that made me think that the ability to maybe to utilize some of those platforms that the kids use anyway, you know, in terms of gaming or communication, social media, all of that. I just suddenly thought maybe, because the school days are also very long and very sort of boring, just sitting there and listening, writing down, you know, it seemed just sort of fantastically outdated in some way. And I wondered if maybe VR and AR could potentially create a much more immersive sort of environment for some of the very abstract teaching, you know, and maybe with artists collaborating of how these abstract concepts could be, I don't know, could be a more sort of interesting, or I don't know, maybe more visual experience or something, more tactile experience, whatever AR and VR will be able to do. Because in the future, ideally, I think we're going to just have simple glasses we're going to put on, and everyone will have maybe a set of VR or AR type of devices at home, even, or wherever else they will be going, you know. I think it will become quite easily available in the future. So I mean, it wasn't so much a question, more like an idea, maybe that in education, certain ideas could really be harnessed that have come out from the more performative side of things. And I was,
Agnes, I think it's happening. I think it's happening in many, many different areas. And of course, I'm not an educationalist and I'm not a psychologist, but I do know that that there are studies of working with VR and AR with autistic children, for instance, you know, that suffer from a sensory overload. And of course, if you can control sensory perception in a very, very detailed way, you can then, if there's a specialist in the audience, please don't kill me. I'm trying to put it into very simple terms. But I think what you can probably do is you can take tiny, tiny, tiny steps of sensory perception that can be tailor-made for people, and therefore kind of open up sensory perception. Rae is nodding, so maybe it's not all silly what I'm saying. But yeah, so I do think it's happening. I just think that there's so many experiments happening and so many studies happening in this area that I would want to repeat is pervasive in our lives, that we actually just don't know about. And there are just so many things that we use or we have experience of, and then others they're not. So, you know, the first time I was in a VR environment in Singapore, I was convinced that I was flying. I was flying, and then I was drowning, and then I was flying up again. And it felt exactly the same as my flying and drowning dreams. Now, that is amazing, yeah? And that seduced me into wanting to know more about a VR experience, because it was that experience in some theme park in Singapore. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We should move on, I think, because we've got some more questions and we've only got about 10 minutes left, I think. So could we have the next question, please, Kelly?
Yeah, and this comes from Adrian Kear, and this is for all of the group. Adrian, I think your microphone will be on shortly. There we go.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I was struck by Arnold's description of filmic space, not as an experience of space, but as a representation of space. As ever, that's quite pithily put, and I think that's really useful. But I wanted to sort of say that's potentially the case for an audience experience. What if we flip that perspective to think about the maker and performer experience? And of course, part of that is that a lot of performers, particularly, and I'm thinking here particularly about my student performers who are training actors, their experience of online performance is the mirror effect of almost performing into the void, performing to the reflection of yourself back to yourself. And we probably all experience this in the conference as we're presenting ourselves in that context. And I wondered whether there was something in that which is about the way in which the kind of the logics of the scene and maybe the logics of the digital are in themselves a displacement of the figure of the performer or a displacement of the figure of the actor. So for example, in Thea's description of the viewer actor in the immersive AR, VR performances, there you have the configuration of the spectator and the actor conjoined. And is that because the actor is displaced within the mise-en-scène, within the mise-en-scène of the digital? And likewise, I was thinking about Paul's description of the urgency of the end of the Anthropocene as being a displacement of the figure of the human actor as necessarily being centralized and necessarily being configured as being the kind of agent within the environmental fabric. So that's my question really. Is there a sort of historical logic stepping in through all this, which is precisely about the displacement of the figure of the actor?
Arnold, would you like to answer first?
I'm trying to think if I can put it in a historical context. I'm not quite sure that I can, but I think what you are saying is absolutely true. And part of what is interesting to me in all of this that we've been talking about is that there is our paradigm, the way in which we are both experiencing performance or experiencing performing, is being altered by newer technologies that never existed before. And it's we're still trying to figure out how to use these tools. I mean, a lot of what Thea was talking about in terms of using it for therapy, that's a kind of a tool. It's a kind of performance, but it's a tool. In theater, going back to the beginning of the 20th century, so people started to experiment with film, but it took a long time to figure out how the vocabulary of film fit in with the vocabulary of the three-dimensional stage. And then of course, video and digital technology came along and the same thing. And some people have figured out how to do that, again, both from the standpoint of the performer and the standpoint of the audience. And some performances just use it as a gimmick, or they haven't quite understood how these vocabularies speak to each other. So I think we're in this very exciting experimental time in which I think is going to shift our understanding of space, our understanding of performance, our understanding of performing, and all of those interactions. I just don't think we're there yet, and it might take a while. But I think when we figure out how all of this works, it will be something very different. And of course, at that point, some other new technology will come along and this will become irrelevant.
Exactly, yes.
Anybody else want to pick up on that? There's a very good point in the chat, which I think picks up on what Adrian says from Neil Dwyer about this idea for performers that the mutual construction of a performance between the actor and the audience, which gets interrupted when there's nothing there, when there's no there, or no one there, is going to have a fundamental sort of implications for the training of actors. I think we're going to need it.
Can I go back? I was just thinking about the E.M. Forster story again about the machine stops, which I suggest everybody read. In this world that Forster has created, everybody's in their individual cubicles. There is in fact a transportation system that could take people back and forth. They could visit each other. They could go to different places within this world, but they figure, why bother? And they don't use this. And so they become isolated, communicating only through the technology. And, in a strange way, maybe that is part of what's going on now, or what we're confronting in a way. Do we have to go to a theater? Do we have to all assemble in one place? We have the means to do it, the possibility to do it, but maybe we no longer feel that we need to do it because there are other means of creating and communicating.
No, thanks. That's a good point. We've got one more question, I think, and then we will break for lunch. Let's have the last question from Bianca, I think. Bianca Mastrominico. Thank you, Bianca. Can you put your mic on? There she goes. Hello.
Hi. Good afternoon. Yes, it's for Arnold. Mainly, I'm a performer, so I'm not a theater designer. But it's very interesting to hear from all of you from that specific perspective of the kinesthetic experience of space that you were talking about. in my experimentation right now on Zoom, I feel that it's my body who is creating that kind of experience for myself in this kind of mirror effect of the screen, but also for the spectators. And it's that kind of relationship with the gaze of the camera, which is becoming my way of inhabiting the space on Zoom, for example. So my question is basically, do you think, could we say that it's not just up to the space itself to create that kinesthetic experience, the way we construct space, but it's also how the performance transform the Zoom place into a shared performance space. So what is the kind of the architecture of the performance body that can actually achieve that sense of space? I mean, we're playing with backgrounds a lot in Zoom as well. So we're playing with different ways of manipulating that kind of space and our bodies within that space. So in a way, what I'm saying is I agree with you. And perhaps from a performance point of view, I also have this question in mind. Can I be that agent for creating that kinesthetic experience on digital?
Thank you, Bianca. Does anybody want to answer that quickly? Arnold?
Again, I am neither a performer nor a designer. I'm not entirely sure, but it seems to me that, as you know, from the very beginning of time when there were performances, there have always been these. It's a binary. There is a spectator, there is a performer, and they each create something. So I think that a performer, can create a new space, perhaps transform the space of the performer. And I would just go back to this idea that we're still trying to figure out how to do that. What does this new technology, and by that I think of it as a new vocabulary, how do we use that? We're learning a new language. Some people are far more advanced with it. Some of us are maybe stuck in the past. But I don't think we understand yet all the implications of it, even though it is happening around us and overtaking us and moving ahead of us. So yes, I think for the performer, it becomes just a different awareness and a different understanding of where you are and what your intent is and how you are intending or wish to communicate with a spectator, and what that means, and then how you use the tools at your disposal, whatever they are.
Thank you, Arnold. It's 1:15, so we need to stop. It's a good place to stop, actually, because I think this relationship, we can't, a performer's a part of the scenographic, whole experience, and it's interesting that we're seeing that there's got to be shifts there as well. I think the questions about materiality that have come up are going to be picked up this afternoon, I know, in various presentations, and that shift and our relationship with materials and the relationship with the materials that form part of the work we make is going to be very important this afternoon. We've also got a shared experience that, as well as the music, just to remind you about this afternoon, in your program, it mentions about having 2 pieces of chocolate, because we're going to have a shared experience of eating some chocolate together this afternoon. So just before I say goodbye to everybody, have we got some music for us to have over lunch, Kelly? Have you started? Yeah.
Yes, it's from Irene. It's already in the chat, so that's there for everyone to experience.
So, Irene, we've got your music in the chat. It's just for me now to say thank you so much to our panelists, to our presenters this morning for a really stimulating morning. Thank you so much, Taya, who I'm sure now is ready to go to bed because it must almost be midnight. Or
I was just going to say I will say goodbye or good night now.
Say good night to you. Thank you.
Leave you here, but it's been great. It's been great to be part of this and to meet you all the virtual.
No, it's fantastic, and thank you, Rae, for your excellent comments and your experiences, which have added to the richness of the debate, and Paul as well for your very important contribution that tells us that the conversations that are going on in the big institutions now about having to do things differently, and that's very encouraging. And the attendees are still putting loads of things in the chat, so we'll go on. Arnold, you're going to stay with us and you'll be rejoining us for the discussion, the final discussion later this afternoon. Have I said everything? I think, Kelly, is that it? Is it time for lunch now?
It is indeed, yeah.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Everybody, see you back promptly at 2 o'clock.
Ciao.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Ciao.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.